A priceless diamond disappears without a trace. What secret lies hidden? Welcome to Crimson Whisper. I am your host, Bramwell. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in. I treasure every response. Now, let's uncover the mystery. The chill of a London morning crept through the narrow streets of Baker Street, wrapping the city in a damp, silvery fog. I, Dr. John Watson, had scarcely finished my breakfast when the sharp rap of a visitor echoed through our flat. Holmes, reclining in his armchair with a violin cradled lightly in his hands, barely stirred. "Come in," he called, his voice brisk, yet laced with an anticipation I had long since learned to recognize. A tall man, dressed in the finest black of a solicitor, entered with a hurried gait. His face bore the unmistakable signs of distress, tight lips, furrowed brow, and eyes that darted as if he feared something unseen. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I am Edmund Carraway, attorney to Lady Eleanor Blackwood. I come with a matter of the utmost delicacy and urgency." Holmes sat upright now, fingers steepled, eyes gleaming with that peculiar mixture of curiosity and calculation. "Pray, Mr. Carraway, enlighten us," he said. "Time is precious, and I do enjoy a good puzzle before breakfast." Carraway swallowed and continued. "Last night, during a private viewing at Lady Blackwood's residence, her prized possession, a diamond of extraordinary size and clarity, known as the Midnight Star, vanished. It was kept under the strictest security, yet this morning it has disappeared without a trace. Scotland Yard has been confounded. The household is in disarray, and Lady Blackwood is beside herself with worry." Holmes's gaze shifted to me briefly, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "A diamond vanishing, you say? And yet you come to—" "Me, Mr. Carraway, rather than to Scotland Yard, which already claims failure. Curious." "The matter is delicate, Mr. Holmes," Carraway said, lowering his voice. "The diamond is insured, yes, but the loss would bring scandal upon the family. Lady Blackwood insists that the investigation remain discreet. She fears the very name of the thief might sully her reputation." Holmes leaned back, the faintest smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Scandal, discretion, and a vanished diamond. Indeed, this is no ordinary case. Pray tell, Mr. Carraway, were there any signs of forced entry?" "None, sir," the solicitor replied, shaking his head. "Every door and window remained as locked as when the household retired last night. No footprints, no broken glass. Nothing to suggest anyone entered or exited unlawfully." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly whirring. "Interesting. A locked room, a priceless diamond, and yet it is gone. The very type of puzzle I relish." I, too, felt a thrill at the mention of such an elaborate mystery. It was not the usual street-level intrigue or petty theft that Scotland Yard so often presented. This was something refined, something designed to test the faculties of the mind itself. Holmes' attention flicked to the window, where the fog lay heavy over the city streets. "Dr. Watson," he said softly, "prepare your notebook. It seems our morning shall be most illuminating." Carraway handed over a small packet containing letters, guest lists, and a brief account from the household staff. Holmes took them with meticulous care, scanning the contents with the precision of a surgeon examining a delicate instrument. "Fear not, Mr. Carraway," Holmes said finally, rising with his customary elegance. "We shall uncover the fate of this Midnight Star. Every puzzle has its solution, provided one has patience, observation, and, most importantly, the ability to see what others refuse to notice." As the solicitor departed, leaving us in the growing light of a fog-laden London morning, Holmes turned to me with a sparkle in his eye. "Watson, observe carefully. The game, as they say, is afoot, and I dare say this one may prove quite singular." The mystery of the vanishing diamond had begun. Little did we know how labyrinthine the path ahead would be, nor how many false leads and cunning deceptions awaited us in the shadows of the city. The moment Carraway's footsteps faded into the foggy street, Holmes moved with a purposeful energy that I had long learned to associate with the opening of a case. He began pacing the room, his long fingers brushing the corners of the letters and guest lists laid before him on the small writing table. "Watson," he said without looking up, "observe the manner in which the solicitor handled the papers. Note the careful preservation of seals and the absence of any hurried motions. These are small matters, yet they speak volumes. I raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to take him seriously, but he ignored my skepticism entirely, leaning over the documents with a surgeon's precision. "See here," he murmured, tapping a particular line in the household account. "The maid insists she locked the display case at precisely 10 o'clock. Yet the clock in the hall chimes 9:59 when the household retires. An insignificant difference to most, but the mind of a detective perceives the irregularity." I scribbled notes quickly, trying to capture his reasoning, even as my mind struggled to connect such minor details to the disappearance of a diamond. Holmes, however, seemed to relish these subtleties, as if the slightest anomaly were a flame guiding him through the labyrinth of the case. After a long silence, he turned suddenly toward the window, pressing his palm to the cool glass, as if listening to the whispers of the city outside. "London is never still, Watson. Every street, every shadow conceals a story. Our task is to uncover the one that pertains to Lady Blackwood's unfortunate predicament." He moved to the fireplace and, in a gesture that was both deliberate and theatrical, removed a small magnifying glass from his coat pocket. Dropping to his knees, he began examining the rug near the door where Carroway had stood. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a scarcely noticeable indentation, a slight depression in the weave. "Someone leaned here, deliberately, to measure the room, perhaps, or to consult a note concealed upon their person. Most men would never notice it, yet it remains a silent testament to their presence." I knelt beside him, peering at the rug as Holmes continued. "No footprints of any kind led from the hallway to the display case. No scuff marks, no dust disturbed, save this minute impression. A gentleman, one practiced in subtleties. And consider the absence of forced entry. Our thief was either intimately familiar with the household or exceptionally clever." The more Holmes examined, the more I realized how entirely he had averted himself from any commonplace assumption. While I would have assumed the theft was a matter of brute force or a brazen act under the cloak of night, he considered the possibilities of deception, misdirection, and a mind calculating each move with meticulous care. As he rose, he took a small notebook from his pocket and jotted down a series of seemingly unrelated observations. The angle of the display case's lock, the faintest smudge upon the glass, and a single, almost imperceptible thread clinging to the velvet lining. "This thread," he said, holding it between thumb and forefinger, "is not from Lady Blackwood's dress nor any uniform within the household. Observe its texture, Watson. It is silk of the finest quality, dyed a deep sapphire. Someone brought their own tools, their own gloves perhaps, yet in a moment of carelessness left this tiny remnant behind." I found myself astonished. The simplicity of the clue, so easily overlooked, contrasted sharply with the elaborate theories I had been attempting to formulate. Holmes, by contrast, seemed to gather the scattered fragments of reality and fold them neatly into an emerging picture. He turned toward me, his eyes alight with the familiar spark of triumph. "Watson, we have the outline of our culprit, though the details remain veiled. Consider, no forced entry, a locked room, a display case secured by someone accustomed to precision, and a thread of distinctive silk. The thief moves in the shadows of propriety, yet their very carelessness betrays them." I nodded, absorbing the information while trying to suppress my impatience. "And the staff, Holmes, have you considered their accounts? The maid, the butler, Lady Blackwood herself? They may hold the keys to timing and opportunity." Holmes tapped the notebook lightly. "Indeed, Watson. Yet the reliability of their testimony must be measured against the evidence of our senses. Human memory is fallible, and the eyes that see often fail to perceive. Our task is not merely to listen, but to discern the truth concealed beneath appearances. That is the essence of deduction." We prepared to depart for Lady Blackwood's residence, gathering coats and walking sticks, and I could not help but feel the stirring of anticipation that always accompanied the commencement of one of Holmes's cases. The fog had thickened in the streets, curling around gas lamps and shrouding the city in a ghostly pall. London seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that something extraordinary was afoot. The journey to Belgrave Square was quiet. punctuated only by Holmes' occasional murmurs as he observed minutiae along the way. A shoe print barely visible upon the damp pavement, a carriage wheel mark slightly askew in the mud, and a faint scent of violet lingering in a doorway. Each observation, seemingly trivial, he catalogued with precision, murmuring connections and possibilities to himself. Upon arrival, we were met by Lady Blackwood, a woman of dignified composure, yet clearly unnerved. Her eyes, wide with apprehension, flitted between Holmes and myself. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you must understand the gravity of the situation. The diamond, my family's legacy, is gone. I do not know whom to trust. Every face in my household seems suddenly suspect." Holmes inclined his head, his piercing gaze sweeping over her with analytical subtlety. "Madam, fear not. It is precisely because you cannot place trust that I may yet untangle the truth. Every clue, every omission, every small oversight is a thread, and if we follow them patiently, the pattern will emerge." He turned to me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Watson, we shall begin with the display room itself. The thief's movements will be betrayed there, in ways that the untrained eye cannot perceive. Let us see what whispers this chamber may offer." As we stepped into the grand hall, the air was thick with tension and the faint, lingering scent of polished wood and waxed floors. The display case sat in the center of the room, glass gleaming despite the absence of its famed jewel. Holmes's eyes roved over every detail, from the hinges of the case to the faint scuff of a shoe upon the carpet. Each glance, each pause, suggested a mind calculating probabilities, tracing movements and eliminating impossibilities with relentless precision. I watched him with awe, sensing that the true mystery lay not merely in the theft itself, but in the intricate dance of deception, cunning and opportunity that had allowed it to occur. And in that moment, I knew we were at the threshold of a most singular investigation, one that would test the very limits of deduction, patience, and intellect. Holmes broke the silence at last, his voice calm yet commanding. "Watson, observe closely. What is hidden in plain sight is often the very key to our understanding. The midnight star has vanished, yes, but it leaves traces, not in the obvious, but in the subtle. And it is there we shall find our answers." The game had begun in earnest. Holmes moved toward the display case with the precision of a man who had already charted every conceivable movement within the room. I followed closely, my eyes scanning the polished wood, the glinting brass hinges, and the faint reflections in the glass. The absence of the midnight star seemed to amplify the silence, each creak of the floorboards echoing as if the house itself were holding its breath. Holmes circled the case, kneeling now to inspect the base. "Notice the dust, Watson," he said softly, his voice like a whisper in a cathedral. "Not disturbed uniformly, yet certain areas are immaculate. The thief handled the case here, likely the point at which the diamond was removed. The rest of the carpet less so, subtle but telling, and see these slight abrasions upon the brass. Not from keys or locks, but from fingernails. Human interaction, deliberate yet hurried." I leaned closer, trying to perceive what he did. "So the thief wore gloves for much of the act, then removed them to manipulate the lock or display." "Precisely," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. "But observe the detail most would miss entirely. The indentation in the carpet aligns with the placement of a small, rolled-up paper that must have been used to steady the case. The paper is gone, but its evidence remains. This is no ordinary criminal. This is someone with practice, care, and nerves of steel." He stood abruptly and turned toward the fireplace, removing a small handkerchief from his coat. Holding it up to the light, he inspected the fibers with his magnifying glass. "Violet, you see, Watson. A faint scent of violet oil clings to this space, subtle yet unmistakable. The house staff would scarcely notice, but our thief cannot resist leaving a trace, whether from habit or vanity. Note, too, that the scent is strongest near the display case, yet diminishes rapidly toward the exit. They spent only moments here, precise in their actions and careful not to linger unnecessarily." I made a note, feeling increasingly outmatched yet fascinated by the clarity with which Holmes interpreted the room. And the household staff, I asked. Could they be involved, or are they mere witnesses? Holmes waved a hand dismissively, though his eyes remained fixed upon the case. Witnesses mostly, though one or two may know more than they admit. Observe their testimony critically, Watson. A slip of the tongue, a hesitation in speech, or a too careful alignment of facts often reveals far more than any confession. But, for now, the room itself speaks with greater honesty than human lips ever could. He moved to the window, drawing back the heavy drapery and scanning the street below. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing the bustle of carriages and pedestrians. Yet Holmes's attention remained internal, focused upon the intricate web of details the room offered. "Consider the window, Watson," he said. "Not forced, no marks of entry, yet its placement is crucial. Any thief must have planned the approach and retreat meticulously. We must also consider opportunity. Who had access? Who moved freely? Within these walls? And who could act without arousing suspicion?" I glanced toward Lady Blackwood, who had been watching our movements with a mix of anxiety and hope. Her composure was remarkable, yet the tension in her hands betrayed the gravity of her loss. Holmes observed her briefly, as if weighing her reactions against the evidence before him. "Madam," he said at last, "your household is well managed. Yet even in the most disciplined establishments, gaps emerge. Our task is to find the gap through which the midnight star slipped unnoticed." He returned to the display case and examined the lock more closely, holding his magnifying glass over. The fine mechanism. "A sophisticated lock," he muttered, "easily manipulated by someone who understands its inner workings. And yet, note this scratch upon the brass. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but indicative of a tool used improperly, or perhaps hastily. Someone confident, yet prone to human error. A careful plan undone by impatience." Holmes's hands moved deftly over the case, lifting the hinges slightly, testing the friction and inspecting the polished surface for fingerprints. "No marks of powder or wax," he noted. "Yet the absence itself is significant. It tells us the thief avoided the obvious, knowing that Scotland Yard would be drawn to the simpler avenues of inquiry." I marveled at the clarity with which he dissected the scene, seeing patterns and motives invisible to my untrained eye. "And the thread?" I asked. "The silk you discovered earlier?" Holmes held it up, rolling it between his fingers. "Yes, Watson. Sapphire silk, extraordinarily fine. Likely from a glove, or perhaps from a lining of a garment designed to protect one's hands during delicate operations. Whoever wore it moved with deliberate care, yet in a single moment of haste or vanity, a fragment was left behind. That fragment, though small, is a thread to the identity of our culprit." He leaned closer to the case, now speaking in a voice almost to himself. "Observe the alignment of objects within the room, Watson. The placement of the display case, the nearest chairs, the layout of the carpet. All of these conspire to guide the thief's actions. See here," he said, pointing to a barely perceptible scuff on the floor near the sideboard. "A misstep, perhaps from someone distracted, or perhaps deliberate, to mislead any observer. Subtlety in error is often the most telling clue." Began to sense the complexity of the case, realizing that every detail Holmes examined would later converge into a revelation no ordinary mind could anticipate. "It seems," I said slowly, "that the more carefully the thief planned, the more vulnerable they became to their own overconfidence. Holmes's eyes glinted with satisfaction. "Exactly, Watson. Criminals of this sort, gentlemen thieves if you will, rely upon precision, yet underestimate the power of observation. Each movement, each oversight is a breadcrumb leading to their undoing, and we shall follow it step by step until the truth stands before us, undeniable." He straightened, glancing around the room one last time, as if imprinting every detail into memory. "We must speak to the household staff individually, ascertain timing, routines, and any discrepancies in their accounts. Misdirection is as natural to them as the dust upon these floors. Our task is to separate the truth from the performance." Lady Blackwood, though tense, appeared reassured by Holmes's composure. "Do you truly believe we can recover it?" she asked. Holmes gave a slight nod, his expression a blend of confidence and calculation. "Madam, the midnight star leaves traces not in the obvious, but in the subtle. We follow those traces patiently, and we shall find our answers. You may rest assured that discretion will be preserved and the perpetrator brought to account." I watched as he moved to the door, already forming a plan to question the staff and examine the household further. The fog outside pressed against the windows, a reminder that London streets hid secrets as readily as the rooms within Belgrave Square. I realized then that this would be a case unlike any other, a puzzle of precision, misdirection, and intellect, and that every step forward would demand the full measure of Holmes's remarkable powers of deduction. The investigation had moved, from observation to analysis, from mystery to careful unraveling, and I felt the thrill of anticipation that accompanies the first true steps into the heart of a most singular crime. Holmes directed our attention next toward the household staff, insisting that we begin with those whose movements during the previous evening were most closely connected to the display room. The maid, a young woman with nervous eyes and hands tightly clasped, was summoned first. She trembled slightly as she described her duties, the care with which she locked the case and the strict routine she followed throughout the evening. Holmes listened intently, his gaze resting upon her hands rather than her words, as if the very way she moved revealed truths unspoken. "You are certain, Miss Hargrove, that no one approached the case after you secured it?" Holmes asked, his voice calm but incisive. I believe so, sir," she replied. "The house is large, and I kept to my rounds, but I did not see anyone near the display case. No one at all." Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though weighing her response. "And yet," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "the case was opened and the diamond removed. You must forgive me, Miss Hargrove, but memory is a fragile companion, easily influenced by fear or assumption. We shall see what others recall." Next, the butler, a man of precise posture and deliberate speech, entered the room. His presence radiated authority and calm, yet a tension lingered in his measured movements. Holmes began questioning him in detail, tracing the timeline of the household's movements with exacting scrutiny. "Mr. Bates," Holmes began, "you observed the evening's routines. Did any guest depart earlier than expected? Did you notice any irregularities in carriage arrangements, door keys, or lighting?" Bates considered each point with care. "No, Mr. Holmes. All guests followed their prescribed schedule. Lady Blackwood herself retired promptly, and the household staff attended to their duties without interruption. I am confident in the security of the residence." Holmes, however, was not content with confidence alone. "And yet a diamond has disappeared. Confidence is not evidence, my good man. We require the minutiae, the small gestures, the hesitations, the half-formed recollections. Those are the threads from which truth is woven." We proceeded to interview the other staff, each adding fragments to the tapestry of that evening. The cook spoke of deliveries, the gardener of a carriage arriving late in the afternoon, and a footman mentioned a guest who had lingered near the entrance longer than propriety would suggest. These small, seemingly trivial details Holmes recorded meticulously, connecting them in his mind to the observations made at the display case. At one point he paused and bent over the floor near the sideboard, examining the faint scuff mark he had noticed earlier. He traced it carefully with a gloved finger. "Ah," he murmured, "our first divergence. The butler claims no one approached here, yet the scuff indicates someone's weight pressed against this spot, a calculated act, no doubt to mislead any casual observer. And see here, the dust on the floor has been subtly displaced in a pattern suggesting an unfamiliar gait. Tall, narrow-shouldered, deliberate but with a slight hesitation at each step. The perpetrator measures each motion, Watson, yet cannot eliminate all human imperfection." I watched, fascinated, as Holmes moved from one clue to the next, drawing connections invisible to any but the most trained eye. "It seems, Holmes, that we may have a visitor among the guests who knows the household intimately, or has observed it carefully in advance." Holmes smiled faintly, though his eyes remained sharp. "Indeed, Watson, yet we must not overlook those who move within the household every day. Familiarity can breed opportunity, but it also invites suspicion. The key is to determine who possessed both motive and access, and who could execute this theft with calculated precision without arousing alarm. Lady Blackwood entered, her presence composed yet anxious. She had summoned the guest list for that evening, and Holmes took the papers with a single glance, scanning the names with a rapidity that suggested he was already forming hypotheses. "Observe, Watson," he said, "the intersection of social obligation and opportunity. Several names recur in positions that afforded them access to this very room. Others would have no reason to linger near the display case, yet appearances can be deceptive. A carefully orchestrated diversion may place a gentleman in plain view while his accomplice acts unseen." I noted the names aloud as Holmes continued, his silent calculations. Sir Reginald Carstairs, a financier known for his charm and discretion, Lady Marguerite Lonsdale, a relative visiting from the countryside, and Mr. Alfred Kingsley, a young man recently introduced to the household, yet with an air of familiarity unusual for someone of his tenure. Each presented a different profile, motive and opportunity, yet none were immediately incriminated. Holmes's eyes flicked to me suddenly. "Watson, the very simplicity of the scene is misleading. The thief relies upon misdirection, ensuring that the obvious path appears viable, while the true route remains concealed. Note that the room itself offers multiple exits, none forced, yet each presents a challenge for removal of a jewel of this magnitude. One must possess both daring and ingenuity." He walked toward the window and peered out at the street below. "Consider the fog, Watson. It shields and reveals in equal measure. A carriage may approach unnoticed, a messenger may pass unseen. The thief does not act in isolation. Timing, coordination, and careful observation of the household routines are as essential as skill in handling the diamond itself." Returning to the display case, Holmes knelt once more, his fingers brushing over the polished wood, the brass hinges, and the faint traces of dust. "Here, Watson, is our puzzle in microcosm. Each mark, each misstep, each fragment of thread is a clue, but the full pattern requires synthesis, connecting evidence to motive, observation to opportunity. The first suspect may present themselves as the most logical, yet logic is often a veil for deception." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "We shall begin with Sir Reginald and observe his reactions closely, then Lady Marguerite, and finally Mr. Kingsley. Each will reveal, whether knowingly or unconsciously, their alignment with truth or artifice. Human nature betrays itself more readily than the most cunning thief anticipates. As we prepared to summon the guests for questioning, I could sense the tension in the room deepen. Each person who entered the household had their own motives, their own secrets, and their own opportunities. Holmes, however, appeared unshaken, his mind already weaving the strands together, plotting the trajectory from observation to revelation. In that quiet moment, I realized that the case of the Midnight Star would demand patience, precision, and an unwavering eye for detail. Every word spoken, every gesture made, and every subtle mark upon the room could either conceal or illuminate the path to the truth. The true thief was among them, hiding in plain sight, and it was only a matter of observing carefully enough to discern who. Holmes turned to me, his expression calm but charged with anticipation. "So, Watson, the first suspects are in place. We now begin the delicate work of testing reactions, probing inconsistencies, and following the trail wherever it may lead. Misdirection is the thief's ally, yet it is no match for methodical observation and deductive reasoning. Let us proceed, for the game has truly begun." Holmes's gaze swept over the assembled guests, his eyes sharp, almost predatory, as he observed their every movement and expression. Sir Reginald Carstairs sat with a studied composure, one hand resting lightly upon the arm of his chair, yet his knuckles betrayed a faint tension. Lady Marguerite Lonsdale, on the other hand, appeared almost entirely at ease, her delicate fingers playing absently with the lace of her sleeve, though a faint flush on her cheeks suggested a subtle anxiety. Mr. Alfred Kingsley, younger and perhaps less experienced in the art of concealment, shifted restlessly, glancing toward the doorway as if expecting some unseen signal. Holmes circled the trio slowly, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive, allowing the guests to reveal themselves. unconsciously through gestures, postures, and fleeting expressions. "You must forgive my directness," he said finally, addressing them collectively. "But the theft of the Midnight Star has cast a shadow over this household, and I must examine not only the evidence left behind, but also the subtle truths, which may escape even the most careful observer." He paused near Sir Reginald and inclined his head slightly. "Sir Reginald, you were among the last to leave the drawing-room before retiring last night, were you not?" Carstairs inclined his head with the air of a man who expected such a question. "Yes, Mr. Holmes. I lingered to converse briefly with Lady Blackwood regarding matters of business and family affairs. There was no cause for concern beyond ordinary pleasantries." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on a minute movement of Carstairs' hand, a twitch so slight that I almost missed it. "Indeed, and yet a gentleman who lingers has opportunity to observe, to act, or to fabricate appearances. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual within the room?" Sir Reginald hesitated briefly, then shook his head. "Nothing. Everything was in its proper place." Holmes made a small, almost imperceptible smile, moving now toward Lady Marguerite. "Madam, you arrived later in the evening, yes? You would have observed both Sir Reginald and Mr. Kingsley as they moved about the room. Did anything strike you as peculiar?" Marguerite's hand stilled, her gaze darting momentarily toward Kingsley. "Nope, nothing unusual, sir. Everything seemed normal as far as I recall." Holmes' expression remained neutral, yet his mind clearly worked behind the surface of his calm demeanor. "Very well," he murmured, turning now to Mr. Kingsley. "And you, young man? Your movements were less observed, perhaps, yet it is often those who believe themselves unnoticed who reveal the most." Kingsley's eyes widened slightly. I did not... I saw nothing extraordinary. I was merely attending to my duties and retired soon after the others." Holmes stood upright, hands clasped behind his back, and regarded the three guests thoughtfully. "Curious," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Each of you insists upon the ordinary, yet ordinary is rarely so precise as to avoid subtle anomaly. Consider, Watson, the thread, the indentation, the scuff upon the floor. Each suggests human presence, yet each does so in a manner carefully orchestrated to mislead. Our thief is clever and yet careless in the smallest details. There is a single clue, minor yet revealing, that may well illuminate the entire affair." I leaned forward, sensing the significance in his tone. "So a clue you have not yet shared with us, Holmes?" Holmes shook his head slightly. "Not yet, Watson. It must be observed in context, for alone it is meaningless. But combined with these subtleties, it becomes a beacon in the darkness. Let us first examine the room once more, and the interplay of movements and opportunity therein." We returned to the display room, and Holmes's eyes roamed the space with renewed intensity. He knelt once more, brushing aside a small fold of carpet near the baseboard, revealing a nearly imperceptible smear of wax. "Ah," he whispered, "here it is. The secret inconsistency that reveals the truth without a single word from the guilty party. Observe, the wax matches that of a candle burned in the sideboard lantern last evening. Yet the lantern was supposedly extinguished at 9:30, according to the household staff. The timing is inconsistent. Someone has lied or misremembered, a common occurrence, yet here it is physically manifested." Holmes straightened, holding the tiny smear between his gloved fingers. "And note, Watson, that the wax is warm to the touch, recently displaced. Our thief returned here after the household believed all activity had ceased. A deliberate return, then, to remove or adjust evidence, perhaps the diamond itself, perhaps a red herring meant to mislead the observer. Either way, this is our first verifiable clue pointing toward the actual sequence of events." I examined the spot, my curiosity heightened. "So someone returned under cover of darkness or distraction after the others had retired?" Holmes nodded slowly. "Precisely, but observe further. The scuff near the sideboard aligns with this manipulation of wax." The individual hesitated, placing weight carefully, adjusting their actions to avoid detection. "And the thread we found, sapphire silk, likely from a glove removed during this same sequence. One small lapse, Watson, yet enough to betray intent." He moved swiftly now, cataloguing the subtle indications throughout the room. The alignment of furniture, the faint impressions in the dust, and the minutiae of the lock mechanism. These details, insignificant alone, coalesce into a narrative. A narrative of planning, execution, and human error. And while Scotland Yard may consider the case nearly solved, they have overlooked this very sequence. It is the inconsistency that speaks the loudest. Holmes turned suddenly toward me, his eyes bright with that familiar intensity. "Watson, we have now glimpsed the outline of our true culprit. The first suspect, the seemingly logical choice, will soon reveal themselves not through confession, but through the subtle contradictions that escape their control. Misdirection is effective only until one notices the pattern of deviation from truth, and pattern we shall find." He paused, resting a hand lightly upon the display case. "Observe, too, that the candle wax, the scuff, the thread, and the indentation all point toward a single deliberate return. This is no spontaneous act. It is calculated, yet betrayed by haste, by distraction, or by the human tendency to err when under pressure. The thief believes themselves concealed, yet the truth leaves its trace." I felt the weight of anticipation, realizing that we were no longer simply gathering evidence, but beginning to see the invisible lines connecting opportunity, motive, and action. The secret clue, the wax and its associated disturbances, was the key that could unravel the entire deception. Holmes's gaze swept the room once more, a faint smile of satisfaction upon his lips. "The game deepens, Watson. Scotland Yard and the household may believe the case nearly solved, but in truth, the threads of misdirection are already unraveling, one careful step at a time, and the true story of the Midnight Star will emerge in its entirety." Holmes spent the remainder of the afternoon questioning the staff individually, probing inconsistencies, and watching for the slightest sign of anxiety or misstatement. Each person seemed meticulously prepared, their narratives polished, yet Holmes's, eyes unyielding and unblinking, found fissures in the polished surfaces. The maid's hesitation when recalling the exact time she retired, the butler's slight tremor when asked about the lantern, and the subtle glance of Kingsley toward a corner of the room, each was a thread that Holmes pulled gently, teasing the fabric of truth from a web of polite obfuscation. Just as I began to feel that the puzzle was gradually clarifying, a sudden commotion in the drawing room interrupted our methodical inquiries. A loud crash echoed through the hall, followed by a shriek from Lady Blackwood herself. We rushed toward the sound, and I found Holmes moving with a swiftness that belied his usual deliberate pace. In the center of the drawing room, a small table had been overturned, and upon the carpet lay a scattering of papers, broken glass, and a single empty jewelry box. The maid, nearly in tears, pointed to the open window, through which a faint rush of cold air entered. Holmes knelt immediately, his eyes scanning the floor and the surrounding furniture. "No, Watson," he murmured. "This was no accident, nor a hasty intrusion. Observe the pattern. The table has been toppled deliberately, as though to draw attention elsewhere. And yet, the box is empty, as though the thief sought to create a diversion." I looked at him, startled. But the diamond was already missing. Why stage another disturbance? Holmes's gaze never left the carpet. "Misdirection, Watson. The thief wishes to make the household believe that some new, frantic theft has occurred, masking the true timeline and sequence of events. Note the absence of footprints on the threshold, despite the window's open position. The intruder did not depart through this avenue. The window is merely a prop, a stage upon which panic is enacted." Lady Blackwood clutched her hands to her chest, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Is it someone is still here?" she asked in a trembling voice. Holmes shook his head slightly. "No, madam, the intruder has gone. This is a clever ruse, designed to mislead both household and investigator, yet in their cleverness lies their undoing. Observe, Watson, the subtle smear along the side of the table, nearly invisible to the casual eye, and the dust on the carpet, undisturbed in areas that should have been touched if a hasty departure occurred. Someone intended us to think otherwise." Bent down, examining the area as Holmes indicated, and noticed the faint trail of wax, identical in composition to the small smear we had discovered near the display case earlier. "The same wax, Holmes?" I asked. Holmes nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Indeed. The thief returned, Watson, to manipulate perception, and in doing so, they revealed the most critical piece of evidence: the pattern of movement, consistent with the original crime. The intrusion is staged, yet it tells the story of the perpetrator's method. Note the angle at which the table was pushed. It aligns perfectly with the path from the display case to the window, yet terminates just short, avoiding actual exit. A calculated psychological ploy designed to distract attention from the true movements. He rose and approached Lady Blackwood. "Madam, your household has been careful, yet even the most disciplined staff can be manipulated when the criminal understands both human nature and domestic routines. The second disturbance is not a new theft, but a device to conceal the original act and to test the vigilance of those who would pursue it." I realized then the genius of Holmes's approach. While others might have panicked at the apparent escalation, he focused on the consistencies beneath the chaos. "And the suspects?" I asked. "Do these actions indicate anyone in particular?" Holmes's eyes flicked toward the assembled staff and guests, his gaze lingering on Mr. Kingsley. "Observe, Watson, the reactions are as telling as the actions." Sir Reginald maintains composure, almost overly so. Lady Marguerite appears startled yet controlled. Kingsley shifts uneasily, his eyes betraying awareness of more than he admits. Misdirection is often mirrored in human demeanor, and here, subtle, guilt reveals itself in the smallest gestures. He moved swiftly to the open window, kneeling to examine the sill and the surrounding frame. "No marks of entry here," he noted, confirming our suspicion that this is mere theater. Yet someone has carefully displaced items to create the illusion of chaos. The intruder is clever, Watson, yet their very cleverness is their vulnerability. They believe themselves hidden, yet leave traces that reveal their method, their movements, and eventually their identity. Holmes then returned to the center of the room, placing a gloved hand over the wax smear on the carpet. "Consider, Watson, the diamond was removed, the scene manipulated, the witnesses primed to misperceive the sequence, and yet, in every act, the perpetrator left clues that betray the chronology. The secret lies not in what is immediately visible, but in what is subtly misaligned. The timing of movements, the slight inconsistencies, the very human errors of a calculated thief." Lady Blackwood, still clutching her hands, asked softly, "Is there hope of recovery?" Holmes gave a reassuring nod. "Madam, the traces left behind are sufficient. The diamond's journey, from its display to the hand of its thief, has been charted by marks too subtle for casual observation, but perfectly legible to one trained in deduction. The misdirection is clever, but it cannot erase the trail. We are already close to understanding the sequence of events and eventually the identity of the culprit." He turned toward me, eyes bright with anticipation. "Watson, the stakes have risen, and with them the complexity of the game. The second disturbance was intended to confound us, yet it has illuminated a critical path. Observe closely. The pattern of movement, the repeated traces of wax, and the reactions of those present all point inexorably toward a single conclusion. The thief's confidence has led them to overreach, revealing the faintest fingerprints of truth. We shall follow these step by step until the mystery of the Midnight Star is fully revealed. As we prepared to retrace the path of the intruder, I felt the tension in the room deepen. The apparent simplicity of a vanished diamond had transformed into a far more intricate puzzle, with misdirection, stage disturbances, and human frailty interwoven into a labyrinth of deduction. Holmes, however, remained unshaken, his mind weaving the threads into a tapestry that promised clarity amidst the artful chaos. The investigation, I realized, had entered its most perilous stage. The second disturbance had escalated the stakes, testing not only the vigilance of the household, but the acuity of the investigator. Holmes, as always, moved with unerring precision, seeing paths and possibilities invisible to ordinary eyes. And I understood, with a thrill and a shiver alike, that we were drawing ever closer to the moment when the carefully constructed facade would begin to crumble, revealing the cunning hand behind the Midnight Star's disappearance. Holmes spent the early evening in quiet contemplation, moving from one room to another with the purpose and precision of a man rehearsing the sequence of a complex chess game. I followed, attempting to keep pace, though I was conscious of how much more he perceived than I. The household had settled into an uneasy routine, staff attending to duties with a heightened awareness, and guests lingering in cautious conversation, none daring to stray from the visible path of propriety. Holmes paused in the library, where the gaslight cast long shadows across the shelves. "Watson," he said softly, "the thief is clever, yet every act of cunning carries within it the seeds of error. Our second disturbance has given us the opportunity we require. Observe, they have returned to manipulate perception, but the marks left behind betray their precise movements. From this, we may arrange circumstances that will compel them to reveal themselves further." He produced a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with meticulous observations, diagrams of the display room, and careful sketches of furniture placement and foot traffic. "We shall set a trap, Watson, though not one of mere force or surprise. The most effective strategy relies upon expectation. The thief believes themselves undetected, and in that belief, they will act with a predictable arrogance. We merely need to orchestrate conditions that invite such action." I followed him back to the drawing room, where the overturned table still bore faint traces of wax and dust. Holmes crouched, moving a gloved hand over the patterns on the carpet, then rose and began to speak aloud, though his words were directed, both to me and the empty room. "The intruder will return tonight if my hypothesis is correct. They are bold yet cautious, impatient yet deliberate. They will attempt to retrieve or adjust evidence, or perhaps to ensure their earlier deception remains convincing. The critical point is the convergence of opportunity and expectation. If we create that convergence, we shall observe them unmasked." I glanced around, uncertainty in my voice. "And how do we control such a situation without alarming the household, or, worse, endangering ourselves?" Holmes's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "By appearing not to act at all, Watson. We must observe and influence invisibly, guiding the thief's movements while allowing them to believe their actions remain secret. Subtlety is our ally, and observation our weapon. The stage is prepared. All that remains is to wait." Lady Blackwood, aware of Holmes's intentions though not their specifics, withdrew quietly to her private quarters, leaving the household staff in their usual positions but with heightened vigilance. Holmes and I stationed ourselves in the drawing room under the guise of continued discussion, though our eyes roamed over the faint impressions in the carpet, the wax smears, and the alignment of furniture. Every detail mattered. Every subtle shadow could signal movement. From the shadows, a figure emerged with the grace of someone practiced in concealment. The intruder moved deliberately toward the display case, hands steady, posture controlled, yet every step was aligned with the patterns Holmes had previously traced in the carpet. I caught a glimpse of a dark sleeve, finely tailored, and a faint glint of sapphire silk at the cuff, the very thread we had discovered earlier. Holmes barely breathed, eyes fixed, as the figure approached the display case. I could hardly believe the precision with which he observed every minute detail, the direction of movement, the angle of approach, and the faint hesitation near the sideboard where the wax had been manipulated. The intruder paused, as if sensing something unseen, then bent toward the case. Holmes leaned slightly forward and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying unmistakable authority. "I believe you will find, madam or sir, that discretion alone is insufficient to escape observation." The figure froze, the hand retracting slightly, and a faint gasp betrayed the realization that their assumed invisibility had ended. Holmes's eyes glinted with triumph. "Step forward, if you please. There is no need for further deception. The diamond's journey has been traced with care, and the inconsistencies you left behind speak more eloquently than any denial ever could." The intruder's shoulders sagged in a subtle, reluctant acknowledgement of defeat. Holmes advanced with quiet command, guiding them toward the center of the room. "So observe, Watson," he said, "the arrogance of confidence, the precision of calculation, all undone by the human propensity for minute error. Every step has been observed, every action traced. The misdirection, though clever, cannot withstand the scrutiny of careful deduction." I stood in stunned admiration, witnessing not only the capture of the intruder, but the elegance of Holmes's strategic orchestration. By manipulating the room, observing patterns and allowing the criminal to believe in their concealment, he had compelled the very actions that would reveal the truth. Holmes turned slightly, eyes fixed on the apprehended figure. The case, Watson, is seldom resolved by brute force or hurried accusation. The thief's own tendencies, their reliance upon misdirection, and their belief in their own cleverness have delivered them into our hands. We merely provided the stage upon which truth could act. Lady Blackwood, having been quietly summoned to witness the scene, gasped softly at the sight of the intruder revealed. Holmes's hand remained steady, pointing to the traces that had guided our understanding. The thread of silk, the wax smears, the scuff marks, and the precise disturbances in the carpet. All these, he said, combine to form a narrative. And a narrative, Watson, is the most unassailable form of evidence. As the intruder was secured, I felt the full weight of Holmes's mastery. A plan conceived with precision, executed with patience, and revealed with clarity. The Midnight Star's disappearance, initially baffling and seemingly impenetrable, had been unraveled through careful observation, deduction, and subtle orchestration, leaving the perpetrator ensnared by the very cunning they had relied upon. Holmes guided the apprehended figure into a chair near the center of the drawing room, his keen eyes sweeping the room as if to ensure no detail of the moment was left unexamined. The intruder, a man of deliberate movements and polished demeanor, sat with an air of reluctant defiance, though the faint tremor in his hands betrayed awareness of the net closing around him. Lady Blackwood and the staff stood at a distance, their expressions a mix of fear, curiosity, and relief. I too felt the weight of anticipation. All the threads of the investigation had converged, and now Holmes would reveal the intricate pattern hidden beneath layers of deception. Holmes began softly, almost conversationally, though each word carried a precision that demanded attention. You may wonder, sir, how a seemingly meticulous plan could unravel with such speed. Yet it is precisely the characteristics that make one a careful thief that also reveal the smallest missteps. Observe, Watson, the wax smears upon the carpet, the scuff near the sideboard, the indentation where a paper was likely used to steady the display case. All minute, yet collectively they narrate the sequence of events. The intruder's eyes flickered with a mix of defiance and unease. Holmes did not falter, continuing with a calm authority. You entered the display room after the household had retired, confident that the candlelight would mask your movements. You manipulated the lock, removed your gloves, and extracted the Midnight Star with precision. Yet in that very precision, you left traces, thread from the glove, subtle pressure marks in the dust, the wax transfer from the lantern, all of which betrayed the care you took to remain unseen. Sir Reginald, Lady Marguerite, and even the staff leaned slightly forward, captivated by Holmes's explanation. The drawing room, once a theatre of uncertainty, now seemed to hold every secret laid bare under Holmes's scrutiny. Holmes paused, letting his words sink in before directing his attention to the intruder's demeanor. And then, believing your act complete, you staged the second disturbance. A table overturned, an open window, scattered papers, a theatrical misdirection intended to draw attention elsewhere. Yet in that very act, you revealed the path of your movement, the alignment of your steps, and the subtle pattern that confirms your return. You believed yourself hidden, yet your own cleverness created evidence far more compelling than any ordinary trace. The intruder swallowed hard, his polished composure cracking ever so slightly. Holmes's eyes glimmered with the satisfaction of one who sees every detail align. Consider also, sir, the human element you underestimated. Reactions, hesitation, slight tremors. These betray intention as reliably as fingerprints. The wax, the scuff, and the thread were enough to indicate opportunity, but your own reliance on misdirection, your confidence that the household and investigators would be deceived, proved to be your undoing. Holmes leaned slightly forward, his gaze unwavering. The pattern of human movement, the sequence of errors, and the timing of actions all pointed to you. The maid's recollection of her rounds, the butler's reports, the guest movements, they all intersected in ways you could not fully control. Your plan, intricate and precise, failed not through oversight of the external environment, but through misjudgment of human observation and deductive reasoning. The intruder's hands clenched into fists, and he finally spoke, his voice low and measured. I did not anticipate your scrutiny, Mr. Holmes. I believed. Holmes allowed him only a moment before interrupting gently. You believed that the cleverest misdirection would escape analysis. Yet, as you see, every subtle movement, every minute inconsistency, every human response is a potential revelation. You underestimated the power of observation. The midnight star, removed with the utmost care, has left behind a trail of clues that, while imperceptible to most, are unmistakable to the trained eye. He gestured toward the display case, now empty save for the traces of prior disturbance. You might argue that no one saw you, that the act was flawless, but perfection exists only in theory. In practice, human error is inevitable. The wax, smears, the indentation, the thread, and the scuff together reconstruct the chronology of your actions. You acted boldly, yet in doing so, you left the most compelling evidence of all, the evidence of your own making. I, too, was struck by the elegance of Holmes's reasoning, the way disparate clues, nearly invisible individually, coalesced into an undeniable narrative. Even Lady Blackwood leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of astonishment and relief, finally beginning to comprehend how the diamond's disappearance had been traced with such methodical precision. Holmes continued, his tone taking on the quiet authority of a teacher unraveling a complex lesson. It was not the household's oversight that led to your exposure, nor an accident of circumstance. It was the very nature of your meticulous planning that produced your downfall. Each action designed to conceal, each manipulation intended to mislead, was itself an unwitting confession, written in the subtle language of dust, wax, and thread. The intruder lowered his gaze, the defiance fading, replaced by grudging acknowledgement. Holmes's final words punctuated the revelation with the inevitability of truth. You sought to possess what was not yours, to manipulate perception and evade consequence. Yet every trace you left, every minute miscalculation, was observed, recorded, and interpreted. The midnight star, though physically absent until your apprehension, never escaped the grasp of logic and observation. Its journey was mapped not by chance, but by reason, and reason has delivered it into our hands. A hush fell over the room, the gravity of Holmes's exposition settling upon all present. Even in the quiet, the brilliance of deduction resonated, leaving no room for doubt. The web of deception, carefully woven by the thief, had been unraveled thread by thread, and the final picture, clear, coherent, and irrefutable, stood revealed. Holmes turned to Lady Blackwood, his expression composed yet warm. Madam, the midnight star is recovered and the perpetrator accounted for. Justice need not wait, for the truth has been illuminated by observation, logic, and careful deduction, and you may rest assured that no detail, however small, has escaped notice. I felt a mixture of relief and admiration, marveling at the clarity with which Holmes had transformed confusion into understanding, chaos into an elegant narrative of cause and effect. The room, once a theatre of uncertainty and fear, now held only certainty and the quiet satisfaction of resolution. The intruder was quietly escorted from the drawing-room by a pair of Scotland Yard officers summoned earlier, the Midnight Star, safely retrieved and returned to its velvet-lined case. Lady Blackwood exhaled deeply, relief softening the tension that had gripped the household for days. The servants moved with subdued efficiency, tidying the scattered papers and restoring the room to its former order, though the memory of the dramatic apprehension lingered in every shadow and corner. Holmes, however, remained seated near the display case, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he observed the final pieces of his plan falling neatly into place. "Watson," he said at last, turning to me with a calm intensity, "we are often presented with the illusion of disorder and confusion, yet within even the most chaotic sequence of events lies a discernible pattern. The Midnight Star was not lost through fortune, nor by the negligence of a careful household. It was removed, manipulated, and concealed by human intent, a human mind, subject to both cleverness and fallibility. It is through the careful study of these tendencies that one may arrive at certainty. I nodded, still absorbing the elegance of his reasoning. It is remarkable, Holmes, I said, how every seemingly insignificant detail, wax smears, a scuff on the floor, a thread of silk, could cumulatively reveal the entire sequence of the crime. Holmes inclined his head slightly. Yes, Watson. Observation is the cornerstone of deduction. The thief relied upon misdirection and expectation, yet underestimated the acuity of human perception when guided by reason. Each act intended to conceal contributed instead to revelation. In the hands of an untrained eye, the case might have remained unsolved, but the patterns are there for those willing to see them. Lady Blackwood approached, her hands still clasped tightly, and looked at Holmes with both gratitude and curiosity. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "how could you be so certain of every detail before confronting the thief directly?" Holmes's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Certainty, madam, is not a matter of hunch or intuition. It is a product of careful observation, methodical analysis, and understanding the motivations of those involved. One studies patterns of movement, of speech, of subtle human reactions. The criminal, confident in their cleverness, reveals themselves not in the obvious but in the minutiae they believe no one will notice." Sir Reginald, who had remained silently observing, spoke at last, his voice tinged with both admiration and humility. "I must admit, Mr. Holmes, that I am both astonished and chastened. I had thought the theft well executed and beyond recovery. Your deduction is extraordinary." Holmes's eyes flicked toward him briefly, though his tone remained impartial. "The extraordinary is often concealed beneath the ordinary, Sir Reginald. It is the careful scrutiny of that which is overlooked that yields understanding. The patterns of movement, timing, and subtle physical evidence converge to tell a story. And in this instance, the story led us inexorably to the culprit." I watched Holmes as he rose, moving toward the fireplace and resting a hand lightly on the mantel. There was a quiet dignity in his composure, a certainty born not of arrogance but of mastery. The thief has been apprehended, the midnight star restored, and the household may breathe once more. Yet, Watson, what is remarkable is not merely the recovery of a jewel, but the revelation of method, of the thought processes and errors that led to its exposure. In every crime lies the seed of its own detection, if one knows where and how to look. Lady Blackwood's voice softened with genuine relief. "And the household, Mr. Holmes? What lesson should we take from all of this?" Holmes regarded her for a moment, his expression almost philosophical. "Vigilance and awareness, madam, tempered by reason and calm observation. Human error and cunning are constant companions, but they can be understood, anticipated, and corrected. One must neither assume perfection nor underestimate intelligence. It is in balancing these that security and insight are achieved." The staff began to relax, whispering among themselves, their earlier tension giving way to cautious smiles. Even Kingsley, who had been implicated indirectly through misdirection and association, appeared reflective rather than defensive, the weight of the evening's lessons settling upon him. I turned to Holmes quietly, my mind still tracing the intricate sequence he had revealed. "Holmes, the beauty of your method is how seamlessly every fragment of evidence aligns to reveal the truth. Even when chaos seems to reign, logic and observation hold sway." Holmes inclined his head, his eyes momentarily distant as if reviewing the evening's events in mental replay. "Yes, Watson, the mind must remain disciplined, attentive to subtleties, yet flexible enough to adjust as new evidence arises. This case, though dramatic, exemplifies the principle. In the ordinary lies the extraordinary, and in the smallest detail lies the greatest revelation. It is a reminder that the world, however complex, yields to methodical scrutiny." Lady Blackwood approached once more, her voice gentle but imbued with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, not merely for the recovery of the Midnight Star, but for the clarity you have brought to all of us. The household will be forever changed by your insight. Holmes inclined his head slightly, a gesture of polite acknowledgement. "The credit belongs not to me alone, madam. Attention, observation, and reason belong to those who cultivate them. My role is merely to apply them in service of truth. And now, with the case concluded, the Midnight Star secure and the criminal accounted for, we may reflect upon the elegance of deduction in action." As the household slowly returned to its usual rhythm, I noted the palpable sense of relief mixed with admiration. Holmes remained near the display case, his gaze contemplative yet alert, ever ready for the next subtle shift in human behavior that might demand his attention. I could not help but marvel at the seamless interplay of observation, reasoning, and intuition that had transformed a baffling theft into a revelation of human nature. A motive and error. In that quiet moment, I understood once more why Sherlock Holmes was unmatched in the art of deduction, and why, in every shadowed corner of London, the extraordinary might be discovered within the ordinary, if only one knew how and where to look. The household had settled into an almost serene quiet by the early morning, the events of the previous night leaving a lingering mixture of relief and astonishment. Lady Blackwood had returned to her private chambers, the Midnight Star safely ensconced once more in its velvet-lined case. Sir Reginald and Lady Marguerite moved with careful composure, exchanging subdued words about the astonishing recovery and the revelation of the thief's ingenuity. The servants, though still whispering softly, now carried out their duties with a renewed attentiveness, their earlier tension replaced by respect for the skill and precision that had unveiled the mystery. Holmes remained in the drawing-room, standing by the display case, his gaze lingering on the faint traces of wax and dust that had so cunningly guided him to the truth. He seemed, as always, both present and removed, simultaneously part of the household, and yet entirely apart from it, his mind occupied with invisible patterns and connections that extended far beyond the immediate scene. I found myself drawn to his side, my curiosity and admiration urging me to speak. "Holmes," I said softly, "the thoroughness of your deductions never ceases to astonish me. Every detail, however minute, seemed to converge toward the resolution with perfect inevitability. How do you maintain such clarity amidst so much complexity? Holmes' expression softened momentarily, a flicker of introspection passing across his face. "Watson, the mind that rests content with the obvious and the superficial will achieve little. Every puzzle, no matter how seemingly trivial or complex, offers an opportunity to exercise reason, to explore human character, and to reveal truths that might otherwise remain obscured. There is always another case, another challenge, another shadow to illuminate." I sensed in that quiet exchange the essence of the man whose intellect had guided us through the labyrinthine mystery of the Midnight Star. Arrogant, precise, and detached, yet entirely devoted to the pursuit of truth, he embodied a singular clarity that few could rival. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the fog, Holmes turned once more to me with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Watson, our work here is concluded, yet the city teems with complexity and human behavior waiting to be examined. We have restored a jewel to its rightful place, revealed the truth behind misdirection, and accounted for human error. But the world moves ever onward, and there are always more puzzles to be solved." I nodded, understanding fully that in Holmes's world closure was but a pause before the next intellectual engagement. The Midnight Star had been recovered, the criminal apprehended, and yet the true marvel remained the method, the reasoning, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Holmes, in his characteristic finality, adjusted his coat and hat, turning toward the door with the quiet decisiveness that always preceded his departure from a case. "Come, Watson. London awaits, and there are shadows yet to examine, patterns yet to interpret, and truths yet to reveal. We may leave the household to recover, but the mind must never rest, for the pursuit of reason is eternal." I followed him into the corridor, the sense of conclusion tempered by anticipation, aware that another adventure, another subtle web of human error and cunning, awaited just beyond the city's foggy streets. And so the mystery of the Midnight Star concluded, not with chaos but with the triumph of observation, intellect, and the inexorable logic of Sherlock Holmes. Holmes and I stood once more in the drawing room, now restored to its calm and orderly state, the Midnight Star secure in its case. Lady Blackwood's relief was tangible, her composure regaining strength after the tension of the previous nights. Even the household staff, previously anxious and cautious, moved with quiet efficiency, the weight of fear lifted by the resolution of events. Holmes's gaze, however, remained sharp and focused, not on the jewel itself, but on the intricate threads of human behavior that had led us to its recovery. "Watson," Holmes began, his voice calm yet carrying unmistakable authority, "the complexity of the Midnight Star affair lay not merely in the theft, but in the deliberate misdirection, the careful orchestration of perception, and the reliance upon human error. The thief believed themselves meticulous and invisible, yet every movement, every subtle act, produced evidence that, when observed with attention, could not remain hidden." I listened intently as Holmes outlined the final pieces of the puzzle. He traced the thief's movements from the initial removal of the diamond to the staged second disturbance, demonstrating how each action, though intended to mislead, actually confirmed the chronology of events. The wax smears, the scuff marks, the thread of silk, all became integral components of a narrative that pointed unerringly toward the perpetrator. Lady Blackwood, captivated by Holmes's clarity, asked softly, "But how did you know the thief would return for the staged scene?" Holmes's eyes glimmered with his characteristic mix of pride and detachment. "Madam, human nature is predictable when studied closely. Confidence and arrogance often lead to repetition. The criminal believed their cleverness rendered them unseen, and in that belief, they acted in a manner consistent with their own psychology. We merely arranged conditions in which their actions would reveal themselves. I noted how even Sir Reginald, previously doubtful, now absorbed the depth of Holmes's reasoning. So every small detail, the wax, the carpet impressions, even the reactions of the staff, was part of a larger logical framework." Holmes inclined his head. "Exactly, Watson. In every act of cunning there exists a vulnerability, a point at which meticulous planning intersects with human imperfection. The subtle traces left behind, invisible to ordinary eyes, narrate the story of the crime. The key is patient observation and methodical deduction." Turning toward the apprehended thief, now under guard, Holmes continued, "You relied upon misdirection, confidence, and the assumption that human perception could be evaded. Yet even the most carefully constructed deception cannot withstand scrutiny that combines attention to detail with the understanding of motive and behavior. Your own carefulness was your undoing. The Midnight Star was not lost. It was merely awaiting discovery by the mind prepared to see beyond appearances." The thief's posture sagged, acknowledging without words the inevitability of the revelation. Holmes' approach was not merely analytical, but almost philosophical, demonstrating the profound interplay between intellect, observation, and human error. Lady Blackwood, visibly moved, expressed her gratitude. "Mr. Holmes, I am indebted to you not only for recovering the diamond, but for unveiling the truth in a manner so precise and illuminating. Our household will remember this lesson for years to come." Holmes offered only a modest nod. "Madam, the credit lies in the application of observation and reason. One need not possess extraordinary power, merely the discipline to see clearly, think methodically, and act decisively. The world presents its puzzles constantly. Some may be solved. Others may remain. But in each, the principles remain the same: attention to detail, logical deduction, and comprehension of human nature." I felt the familiar awe settle over me as Holmes concluded his exposition. Every misdirection, every subtle clue, every human reaction had been accounted for, woven together into a coherent and compelling narrative. The household had been restored to order, the criminal brought to justice, and the diamond returned. Yet the true marvel lay in the elegance of Holmes' reasoning, how a seemingly impossible case was rendered transparent by logic, observation, and insight. As Holmes adjusted his coat and hat, preparing to depart for the next inevitable investigation, he cast a final glance toward Lady Blackwood. "The Midnight Star is secure, the criminal accounted for, and justice, at least for now, restored. But remember, madam, In every shadow lies a potential mystery, and in every detail the possibility of revelation. Observation and reason are our steadfast companions. With that he turned to me, his expression one of quiet anticipation. Watson, London waits, and so do countless enigmas, puzzles, and truths yet to be illuminated. Let us move forward, for the mind that rests does. So at the expense of discovery, I followed him from the drawing room, my mind alive with the lessons of the case, the brilliance of Holmes's deductions, and the realization that no matter how complex a deception may appear, the combination of observation, reason, and human understanding would always illuminate the truth. The midnight star had been recovered, the criminal unmasked, and yet the adventure of intellect continued, as ever, beyond the foggy streets of London, awaiting the next challenge.